right, everybody, good afternoon. How are we feeling? This is probably the most awake bunch I've seen after lunch in a while. Perfect. Cool. So my name is Carly Richmond, and today I'm here to talk about cultural anti-patterns in software engineering. Because I've been thinking about this. We talk about architecture, and we talk about patterns and established principles that make sense for software, and anti-patterns that if you employ those patterns, you're going to end up in a bit of a mess. And we've had those for a long time. But we don't talk about those for people, and we should. And that's what I want to talk to you today about with this rather aptly provocative title. So the reason I am here talking to you about this is my varied experience. So you might look up here and say, well, you look after a team of advocates at Elastic. What do you know about engineering anti-patterns? And I have been there, done that, and got the T-shirt. Before I joined Elastic, which was 3 years ago last month, which is really weird to say, I worked at Morgan Stanley for 10 years, and I started off on the traditional journey that many of you are going through right now. I was a software engineer, mostly on front end, but dabbling in Java. And then I also had stints as an engineering manager, Scrum Master, and I dabbled and failed at Agile coaching and pivoted onto something else. So I've seen these things from various different angles and the damage they can cause, and sadly I've made a few of these mistakes myself, and that's why I'm here to talk to you. Because I wish, as a manager, first time I did that stint, that someone had told me not to do these things and the harm they can cause. So, here are the anti-patterns that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about alerting. We're going to talk about on-call patterns. We're going to talk about performance metrics and how they can be weaponized. We're going to talk about code review culture. We're going to talk about testing. We're going to talk about how we structure our work. And we're also going to talk about conferences and meetups, making it a bit meta, because clearly you all know the benefit, because you're here at DevOps UK. So let's start with the first one of bombarding with alerts. So whose software spits alerts at them that they have to respond to from time to time? Do you want to raise your hand? So not that, I was expecting more, but that's okay. So I've had that situation, but I used to work on really noisy applications when I worked in one particular team. And they sent all the alerts to us by email. Does anyone get their alerts by email? Okay, there's another problem in there. We can talk about that later. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. But what I found with the alerts I was getting was I had a ridiculous volume of these things because I was getting the same alerts for production and non-production environments. So obviously, they're not equivalent quality, so QA was spamming us a lot. And actually, I got so many alerts in my inbox that I came back from a 6-month stint on maternity leave and couldn't open Outlook because the cache just went, no, bye. I did manage to get into my emails in the end, but I did have to delete a few first using the app on my phone, but that's fine. So the thing is, we can still replicate these same problematic patterns within modern observability platforms because we can be using an alert as a conduit for information and not what it's intended for, which is to tell people that something is wrong. And the problem is if you use them in that way of using it as an information conduit, you end up with something called alert fatigue. Have we all heard of alert fatigue? Hands up if you have. A good chunk, fun, fantastic. So what this is, for those who haven't raised their hand, is this notion where you become desensitized to alerts. You're not picking up on them anymore because you're protecting your brain by ignoring them. And the problem is that doesn't work. And if we take healthcare as like a comparable example, alert fatigue is a big problem there as well. And the way that they handle that is that alerts are a binary thing. The system should be quiet if everything is fine and you don't need someone to actually look and investigate. And then when something is wrong, that's when we suddenly start having all the beeping and alarms going off to protect people. And that's what you need to do with your software system. So the way we can pick up on alerts that we don't need is by doing things like looking for false positives, look for false negatives. Look at the behavior of teams. Are they actually paying attention to these alerts or are they hiding in their IDE? All of these things can help us actually turn around and say whether we need these alerts or not, and then have a think about whether you need to tune the thresholds or even potentially switch some of them off. Now, I want to talk about on-call practices as well. So who has some form of on-call as part of their role? They have to be available. To clarify, I do not have an issue with on-call. I have an issue with some of the anti-patterns that come about from a poor on-call practice because it gets in the way. So has anyone had it interrupt things like Christmas, holiday occasions, birthdays? Yep. So I had an instance where I wasn't on call. It was my first day of maternity leave, and I got a call from a developer when I was in the hospital. True story. I have sympathy, but I had bigger things on my mind. I was giving birth to my son. The thing is, when we think about alert, quite often we don't think about on-call practice. We just want to find the person that knows the answer, which is sadly an example here. And it's what I like to call the Brent effect. Now, I'm not talking about our favourite character from The Office here. I am talking about Brent from the Phoenix Project. Is everyone familiar with the Phoenix Project text? Do we like that textbook? Cool. It's becoming a Marmite textbook. I see people going, whenever I ask that question, so I'm always curious. So the Brent effect, for those who are not familiar, the Phoenix Project has this senior engineer called Brent, and he is a central point of a lot of things. He is the person that gets pulled into outage situations. He's the person that gets asked questions about features. He's the one that gets asked to do the most critical items too. And the problem is, as you can probably expect, is he gets pulled every which way, and all of his work ends up getting derailed and not done, and the entire project is sinking because of this key person. Now, when it comes to on-call, the Google SRE textbook, obviously this is SRE and not software engineering, so we need to caveat slightly, recommends a ratio of 25%, because they're assuming that you spend 25% working through on-call and dealing with those issues, and that the remaining 50% is on your actual engineering work, you know, the tickets and things you got to build, that software, and 25% is on something else. But I think, irrespective of whether this is a reasonable ratio in your team, you need to look out for patterns like, is everyone regularly on call? Are people getting exposed to incidents while they're there? Do you need to make use of other techniques, such as like war room games and things, to try and keep people's skills up? And look out for things like swaps and stuff too, to make sure that everyone's on an even keel. Now, the next thing we need to talk about is metrics and weaponization of metrics. So I've seen, particularly as a Scrum Master, that it's very common for us to try and say that metrics are the silver bullet that we can use to compare Team A and Team B to see that they're all performing as we expect. And I've seen people weaponize metrics and use ones that just don't make sense to compare people. So are we all familiar with velocity? Has anyone had tried to compare teams with velocity? It doesn't make sense, does it? It doesn't matter. We can get into the debate of T-shirt sizing or story points or no estimates. That's a whole other discussion. Come to the booth if you would like to chat. But velocity is a weird one because we all have our own scales as a team, and we're supposed to own our scales. So the scale that Team A comes up with is different to Team B. So how can you compare team velocity? How can you compare the amount of points per sprint that each team completes? It's not an even keel. The other one I've seen people commonly compare is DORA. So are we all familiar with the DORA metrics? Raise your hand if you are. So for those who are not, go check out the book Accelerate. And what it is basically a set of measures that indicate the reliability of your ecosystem and how easy it is to recover from failure. So that's the basic principle of those metrics here. And I've seen these be compared between software teams as well, but you can't do that either. Now, this piece came out in 2023 from McKinsey, claiming to be, you can measure software developer productivity. And it's basically using DORA and another set of measures called SPACE, which are more about satisfaction, performance, and it's more based on forms and things. But the fact of the matter is, this is not a silver bullet, and this was widely rebuked because these measures cannot be compared between teams in this way. And these two in particular are very good. So Dan North quite rightly points out that actually you discount particular types of activities by doing this, such as testing and infrastructure, which I think are quite important for software engineering. But then also, Gergley and Kent make very good points in their rebuttal as well. And one of the things they also pointed out was, well, you know, whenever people start using these measures, they end up in unintended places like performance reviews. So please, if you're tracking SLOs right now, which I'm worried are the next ones, don't do that. Try and make sure that you're looking at a team's improvement over time. That's what's more important. Code review culture. Who likes doing code reviews? Cool. Has anyone ever seen a comment similar to this? I'm really sad that hands went up. Now, this is paraphrasing, but I had an engineer that wrote something really similar to this, to an engineer that had been in the company for a few months. This is not okay. Because how do you improve off of that? And I thought for a while it was just me, and then I saw Maha's talk last year from here at DevOps UK, and I'm like, It wasn't just that team, and that made me feel really disappointed. The fact of the matter is, when it comes to code reviews, think about things like checklists, particularly if you're in a situation where you've got multiple technologies, because the patterns that are great for Java, not great for Angular, believe it or not. Leave your opinions at the door and have established agreements, and if you can automate them with tools, so using things like check style is great. Don't be that person that comes into the team and starts wanting to tear the check style apart because the braces are in the wrong place for your liking. Once you've got some established standards, stick with it. And also, don't write an essay. Make sure it's quantifiable feedback to help people grow and learn. And if you can point to other links or resources to help those junior engineers, that's great. Because if you don't do that, people just won't review code. And that bottlenecks everything. So let's not do that, eh? Tests. So I'm not talking about coverage, because that tends to be the rabbit hole we go down when it comes to coverage. Like, you must have 95% coverage, otherwise we're doing it wrong. I'm talking about what I like to call the t-tests. So this is when my CI pipeline would fail because of a test, and I knew that test wasn't good. So I'd rerun things and go to the coffee point for another cup of tea and come back. Does anyone have t-tests in their pipelines? We all do. That's how we go for coffee breaks. In all seriousness, it's not a great indication of quality, though, is it? So what I want you to do is have a think about it. Now, my colleague Jack and I have been having interesting discussions on the booth of this, because we do have some non-deterministic tests, and he does see a use for keeping them. But you can do things like identifying them with retry tools. And then the advice that Trisha G tends to talk about is fix it or delete it, which all the testers then start screaming at me when I say delete the test. But again, is it really helping you? Have a think about that general ethos. If the test isn't helping, you know, there's other ways to get a coffee break. So the next thing is around how we structure our work. So I'm aware that we're enjoying DevOps UK. We're hopefully not checking our email. We're not checking the board. But has anyone got a Scrum board or a Kanban board at work that looks a bit like this? See, we're all admitting this. We've got multiple work items we're working on in parallel. We're often breaching work in progress limits. And the problem is, when we do this, this actually impedes developer flow. And flow is that in-the-zone feeling that we all love. It's one of the things we love as engineers, where we're just kind of embedded in our IDE, typing away, and you know, all the endorphins are coming off and everyone is happy. And this is actually a psychological construct, and it's a state of happiness and a state of mastery. But sadly, if we're doing things like that, and all the other pieces of advice I had with regards to on-call and alerts, combine all these together, and you're going to end up in a situation where we're maximizing distractions, which actually breaks the key principles of developer experience. The other thing that is going to break is this notion of having flex to actually try new things and experiment, because you've got no capacity to think about anything else if you're constantly juggling multiple tickets. And that's even before you have the situation where something fails code review and it goes back to in progress again. So now you're juggling even more items. So let's take some space and time and have flex. You know, don't pack a sprint to the brim, and take some space to try and innovate as well. So you can do that with space-time weeks, which we have at Elastic, which is a week where engineers get to work on something different and try and put something in they think will improve their lives or the product. Or you can do what I used to do in one of my teams, where we would do hackathons every second sprint on a Friday and try and play with these things. Or even learning Fridays. I was at a conference a few weeks ago and someone's using those. We need to have these spaces to try and play about and innovate with things. And if you're constantly back-to-back with work tickets, that space is not there. Now, the last one is very meta, because I'm aware you've probably all got the idea that conferences are a fantastic thing, that we get to learn and grow as engineers by going to places like DevOps UK. But I even had a conversation yesterday with someone. You know, it can be hard. It can be difficult sometimes to get the funding for a ticket. It can be difficult with all those work items that we talked about before. And sometimes people can be quite flippant and say, well, you can just watch the videos after. But the thing that you miss, and this might be a bit more meta for the recording as well, the thing that you miss is the community aspect and the connection. You know, the conversations that you're having out there on the floor, where you get to learn and take away new things. Learning from speakers is fab, but we also learn from each other at these types of events, and that's what we need to make sure that we bear in mind. So make sure that as any managers in the room, you see the value of allowing people to go to conferences and meetups. So if you want to destroy a software engineer, do all of the things that I said, not the good things, the bad things. And you'll end up with really burnt out, unhappy engineers. You'll have confused juniors, and you'll have people leaving. And given it takes a long time to actually get someone in the door, and it's a lot of time taken to hiring, you don't want to do that. You want to do these things instead. You want to alert for legitimate symptoms. You want to have balanced on-call. You want to have performance metrics that help a team grow and improve. You want to have constructive code review. You want to fix the flaky tests. You want to have space to innovate and not pack people's schedules. And you want to come to conferences like this. And with that, DevOps, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much.